Hey everyone, Pocky here, and I wanted to do another Tavern talk type video where I talk about one of the most prominent aspects of the game of Battlegrounds right now, and that is poison. Poison's been in the game since Maexxna and Toxin and Megasaur in the original release, and we've had cards like Amalgadon, Sephin, and Spore come in, and it's always been relevant, but maybe more so now than ever. It's more prevalent, and so I just wanted to talk about some of my thoughts on poison with the recent removal of Maexxna and where we might see the game go from here. So enjoy. To go over it, I'm gonna pull up paint. I think paint is a pretty valid way to discuss stuff here. And the first thing I want to talk about is just the general idea of power creep. Generally, in a game, power goes up. The reason for this is it's more interesting. If we think back to the beginning of Battlegrounds, it was pretty straightforward and simple. There was only 4 tribes to start: Murlocs, Beasts, Demons, and Mechs. You know, compare that to now when we have 8. That's literally half of the tribes available. When dragons were released, Caligos was like, what? How is this okay? In Nadina, they can all get shields. You can scale up your whole board just cycling battle cries and give them all shields with Nadina. Now it's crazy, right? You know, then pirates were introduced. You added the ability of Hogger to go infinite. You could have infinite gold and infinite scaling, and that was crazy. And then elementals, you know, when elementals came out, the strength of Nomi and Gar and low reg especially on 5 was super insane, and just dominated the meta. And you know, we've seen that time and time again. Quillbores came out and were insanely strong as well. If we think back on like a Mama Bear situation, right? If we look at the changes here, Mama Bear was originally a tier 5 minion, or sorry, a tier 6 minion, and it gave 5/5, and it had to be nerfed. It was so powerful and strong that it got nerfed to being a 4/4 minion that gave you know, beasts when you summon them 4/4. It eventually got raised back up to 5/5 to account for power creep in February 2020. And then by August 2020, it was so weak that we moved it down an entire tier to tier 5. And then gave it a similar treatment of changing it back to a 4/4 that gave plus 4/4. And less than a year later, we had to buff it up again to account for the power creep and change it to a 5/5 that gave 5/5. You know, the original stats that it had as a 6-drop, right? That's now the equivalent of a powerful 5-drop. So in general, we've had a lot of power creep just in terms of general stats over the past 2 years that Battlegrounds, 2.5 years really, that Battlegrounds has been out and available to play. And that doesn't apply just to Mama Bear, it's applied to the whole game. And that's okay, right? We don't need to say, oh, well, Mama Bear should be on 6. Like, it wouldn't be good. It fits on 5 now, and it works, and that's good, and it competes with other, you know, directional cards. What we have to consider is that has been influential through the entire game. And so the stats that we saw in the release of the game have been, you know, consistently growing higher and higher. And so things have to be buffed to compete, right? Again, pirates, infinite stats, you know, with elementals we had, you know, really big stuff, and that's still the case. Demons now get really big with Spellbat, and Trickster give things lots of health. That's just natural. In Battlegrounds, there's sort of this idea of like a rock, paper, scissors, right? So we'll have our rock over here, and this is stats, right? And then we'll have our scissors over here, you know, and this might be no, it's not what you think. These are scissors, okay? This is kind of like your token or divine shield builds, right? And then, you know, the last thing that we have is paper. And this is poison. So these three things sort of competed with each other throughout the history of the game, right? Where stats are supposed to be the token and shield stuff. Poison beats stats, and then token shields would beat the poison stuff. Because the poison stuff was typically harder to get a ton of health on or put together. Or even access. And for a while, poison wasn't even meant to be like a build. It was, you know, mostly you could tech into Maexxna if you needed it, or you could play Murlocs and you would add poisons to Murlocs, or, you know, add in one Murloc at the end, right, with a toxin, where you gave a Murloc poison and it acted more as a tech than anything else. One thing that we saw was with Spore, it was released as a tier 4 minion. It was so popular at the time, and people were transitioning to Spore Divine Shields, that Spore was moved to 5 and Selfless was moved to tier 2 off of tier 1. That makes sense because Spore was intended to be a tech card, right? And there's pros and cons to playing Deadly Spore. It's a 1/1, so it doesn't have stats. It can die to a shield, it can die to any summon, right? Whether that's a micro machine or a plant. It, you know, it's not going to have that much impact unless it goes into a big thing. But sometimes you need to tech in the poison, you just need it on your board, because you're not going to have anything that can compete with maybe a big minion of theirs, right? Like if they had a big Wrathweaver, you just needed to have at least a poison to potentially deal with that. As we've come across this power creep, what's happened is, you know, this sort of delicate balance of these three sort of builds has fallen out of weight, and stats, you know, has seen a huge power boost, right? And because of that, poison has seen a really big boost to counter the stats in general, in terms of how strong it is. And because the scaling on stats has been so insane, the token and shield strength has decreased, right? You see less Mama Bear builds, juggler builds. I mean, juggler is a thing, right? When's the last time you saw a juggler comp win a lobby? And then shields like Maexxna and stuff have generally decreased in power as the stat gain of some builds like APM Pirates, Elementals, Humans has sort of gotten out of reach of, you know, a Mama Bear summoning a lot of beasts, basically. Now, what happened recently that's really influencing this meta in particular is we had another poison leave the game. Maexxna is no longer in the game, and so the access to this poison strategy has gone down. And so now it's still powerful, but the access to it has gone down. What that means is that our beloved stats builds are even stronger because the counter is less prevalent. And so we're seeing more and more poison builds kind of own the game. Now, the idea of strict rock, paper, scissors that's not the goal of what you want when we're designing Battlegrounds, right? We don't want poison to just straight up beat stats. We don't want stats to straight up beat tokens. You want there to be some dynamic interplay, right? Because it doesn't feel good if you're just playing a build and you lose because, you know, the other person had the counter, right? If we wanted rock, paper, scissors, we could play rock, paper, scissors, right? In terms of balance, rock, paper, scissors is great. Like the win rates should be perfect, right? You got a 33% chance to pick one. You got a 50-50 to win or lose. You know, when you discount the possibility of a tie, which doesn't progress you, right? If you strictly wanted rock, paper, scissors, there's a game for that called rock, paper, scissors. Battlegrounds can advance on that and make a game that's more interesting than that, and that's a good thing, right? But if you're looking to seek balance, you want that idea, that concept in the back of your head, right? Because again, that is a well-balanced game. Rock, paper, scissors is well-balanced, but that doesn't mean that it's fun or dynamic. So the question is, how do we build a game that addresses this and seeks balance while maintaining interesting gameplay? Well, tribes are one of the things that we have in the game, and you know, the tribes rotate. So what that means is that, you know, we still have access to poison via Murlocs, right? Especially through Sefin, which is, you know, able to give poison to your whole board. Really, really strong. You know, Sefin, this card. This guy is super influential in the meta right now because outside of Spore and adapting an Amalgadon, this is the only card that can give you poison. This is the only card that can counter our stats builds over here. Again, outside of adapting a perfect amount, not necessarily perfect, but a poison Amalgadon, or Spore. In Spore, there's a limited amount. There's only 9 copies of Spore in the game, and there's only 7 copies of Amalgadon in the game, typically. That means that when Sefin or Murlocs are out, what happens is the game turns into a battle of stats, right? Because stats will win the game. From the very start, if you see that Murlocs are out right now in the meta, you can very consistently go for a stat build end game and not worry too much because there's not going to be a ton of counterplay. And if you are ahead enough on stats, you can level and sort of snowball that in to getting Amalgadons, which, you know, are super strong because they're one of the ways that you can get stats and poison and divine shield. It's beautiful, right? You kind of cover all your bases here with Amalgadons if you get enough adapts and you set it up right. And if you go up to 6 faster because you have the stats and you're not worried about losing to poison, you have that freedom to play ahead. Now, one of the reasons that we saw Maexxna removed was for the fact that it could get reborn by reanimating Rattler. the reborn poison was super strong because you didn't need to scale it for it to be an extremely strong unit and act as like 2 poisons, right? It's almost like a divine shield poison Amalgadon, right? You're getting 2 hits out of your poison, and that was super strong. And you didn't need to scale it up, right? You didn't need to invest a ton of gold or resources into it over a few turns. You didn't need to wait for, you know, gems, or you just, there wasn't things to wait for. You hit 2 cards and then you got a very strong unit. There's an obvious con to that, in that, again, if you're someone that spent your whole game scaling up elementals or playing as fast as you could to get those pirates as big as possible, it felt really bad to lose to a reborn Maexxna. Like I said, it feels bad if you do all that stuff and you choose rock and you just lose to paper, right? You put all that work into really choosing rock, making a really good rock, and you just lose to paper. It's frustrating. It's like, it feels like you don't have any control of the game. Not much to it, right? Now, the good thing about that, however, is that Reborn Maexxna, because it required so little investment, also made for a really good comeback mechanic, right? Because the other thing that feels bad is when someone is so far ahead of you that, let's say you're both playing elementals, but one player has 2 nomis and one player has 1 nomi. The player with 1 nomi is never going to be able to scale up their elementals to compete with the person that has 2 nomis, right? It just mathematically won't work. So you had to be able to catch up somehow to compete. And Reborn Maexxna gave you an option to do that, because you were able to put on this really powerful unit on the board, so that maybe while the rest of your units couldn't compete, you could use that to like swing things in your favor, and you could look at the state of the game and play into that. And that comeback mechanic was really important, because, you know, you also want to feel like you have a chance in the game, right? It's no fun if you're just always playing rock and it feels like the other person is always playing paper, but you don't have the option to go scissors, right? I'm sticking with this analogy. I know that it's overdone, but basically, you want to be able to win the game, right? It doesn't feel good to play when you don't have the opportunity to win. And right now, because of the lack of comeback mechanics in a lot of games, that could be the situation where someone is just ahead of you and feels like they hit and there wasn't anything that you could do, and that you didn't have any agency in terms of determining your placement in that game or being able to win that game. So how do you balance all of that, right? It's really complex. You have all these different heroes, you have all these different minions, you have different tribes that are rotating in and out and changing how games play. You know, we talked about it a little bit before the Maexxna change. Poison was extremely relevant because people were playing for stats, and because of that, the strongest thing that you could do was Amalgadons and Reborn Maexxnas to beat those builds. And so if Poison was in the game, you knew that your end game board was going to try to play into that Poison board at the end. Likewise, when Poison wasn't in, you knew, okay, I have a lot more freedom to go for a stats build, whether it's pirates or elementals or demons or something like that. And then you just play into that the whole game. So how do you make the game less like rock, paper, scissors, but have more of a balance like it, right? Well, the number one thing is you need to make decisions matter, right? A lot of players will call this agency. You need the game to have agency so that it feels like your decisions are making an impact and directly influencing your placement in the game or your ability to win. Now, this game wouldn't be any fun if there wasn't RNG, right? If there wasn't different chances of things happening. RNG is a vital component, right? Because that's what makes the game replayable. So we need to have RNG to a degree, while making our decisions matter via agency, right? You do want, you don't want to you want a comeback mechanic, right? You want something to be able to come back, but you also want to have someone that's in the lead have an advantage, right? So you want to balance these things. Make this a little smaller. How do we do that? Well, you need access to techs a lot of times. Throughout the game, there's been different tech units that we've cycled through, that were either successful or unsuccessful implementations. You know, Spore was originally added as a tech because when elementals were added, obviously you could get really big units, but you could have two tribes rotate out, right? And those two tribes could be Murlocs and beasts, and then you didn't really have access to that poison. And well, like I said, it doesn't feel really good if you just can't kill an opponent's unit no matter what you do, because you didn't hit the scaling as fast, just whatever it is, you didn't hit what you needed, you don't have access to poison. The Spore was added as a tech. You know, Selfless is a tech. We've had different taunts play as techs, whether that's Acolyte of Cthulhu, Righteous Protector in the past, right? These are cards that help you play around what your opponent has, whether it's an Adina, whether it's a Cleave. These things help you play around different cards and different things that can occur in the game. Poison is just something that can deal with excessively large units. What's missing when we remove Maexxna from the equation without adding something in to replace it is enough tech to play around some of these insanely high scaling comps. You need to add flexible techs that make those decisions matter and how to play that. Ideas. Bring back Toxin. Move Sephin to 6 so that Murlocs don't have easy enough poison, or remove Sephin altogether and bring back Toxin, because Toxin was interesting in design in that you did have to decide, do I want to, you know, sell an extra unit on my board so that I have the room to play the Maexxna and poison a Murloc on my board. Here's Toxin. Something like Toxin, right? Could come back. If we go think about Spore again, or maybe we could move Spore over to tier 4 again, right? We nerfed it once. Now, with the changes, right? There's things in the game that make Spore less impactful, right? There's more things that can deal with a 1/1 poison, even if it's good. Like Prester's Pyrospawn didn't exist before. We didn't have reanimating Rattlers, so you have a lot more units with Reborn. There's just, you know, more things that Spore isn't as good against. On the mech side, right, you have more resets with mech roll, things like that. So maybe we could move poison to 4. You could also look at some other tribes like Quillboars, which really don't have a lot going for them right now. I think it must be the least played tribe at the moment. What if we added something to make Quillboars be able to stand up to some of these other comps? They have, interesting stuff in Shaker where you're playing a gem on something to, gives your whole board attack. You have things like Duo that plays with that where it's gaining stats. What if we have Tough Tusk, right? You play a gem and this unit gets Divine Shield. What if we had a Quillboar that got poison when you played a gem on it? So then you'd have to make a decision of, if you wanted to play a gem, maybe you could invest it. If you had something like Banner Boar or Charlie, keeping that on the board might be relevant to continually have a poison on your board, but it doesn't always have poison. So you have to have something. So you're making that decision of, do I keep the Charlie on board to give this poison? Do I buy a Sunbacon that I had to cycle through something to play the gem so that I have poison for this fight? Those are decisions that you have to make. And again, then we're diversifying our access to poison by adding it to Quillboars in a different tribe. They can rotate in or out. Then you can have a mix of poison and duos. Maybe that helps revitalize Quillboars. Which, while I am talking about it, in reverting nerfs, I think Flat Tusk could go to 3. And the last thing that I thought about, and I talked about it on my Twitter a little bit, is like a demon that had a death rattle that kills a unit that killed it, right? So destroy the minion that killed this unit. Let me pull up. Yeah, idea. Here. So what if there's a demon, that had a death rattle that destroys the minion that kills this? This is different than poison, right? This is a different concept than poison. It's not poison. But there's pros and cons to it, right? Which makes it interesting, because then again, we're adding more decisions on how to play around what our opponent has to potentially win the game. If we have a death rattle on it, right? The fact that it's a death rattle rather than an inherent trait is interesting, because the unit needs to die. You can't play Divine Shield selfless with it, because if it shields it, then it's not going to get that effect of killing any unit that attacks. Now you can still buff it up, it could still be a relevant unit, but it won't kill anything then. It will only kill what destroys it. Again, if you buff up the health then with Trickster or with Fellbat, then maybe it doesn't die. Maybe it doesn't have the impact that you want it to. But there, like I said, there's pros. You could use it to kill a cleave in the front by using it as cleave protection. These are all different ideas. It would go through a shield. Again, it doesn't get the benefit of being able to get its own shield and kill something, but it could kill a shield, right? If it attacked into that Amalgadon, then you have to, consider how you're placing that Amalgadon. If you want more distraction taunts, if you want to lead with that versus lead with a Spore, it adds in some of those, back and forth counterplays, which is awesome. I know Storybook Brawl, which, is another auto battler. They have a mechanic where it's like poison, but only on attack. This is an idea that we could play with. So again, you still have to, you're making a decision, right? Especially on positioning of where do you play this unit? Do you put it at the front so it can attack sooner? Because it'll have priority, right? Much like a cleave or a wind fury, or a death rattle that you want to go off right away. Or, do you play it further back because you want to try and clear stuff, but then you're more at risk of that unit getting sniped before it's able to have that effect? Another idea. I think that poison does need, or I shouldn't even say poison. Stats builds right now need counterplay, and I don't think it's in the game in a prominent enough way for us to feel like we're in a balanced state that's, as close to rock, paper, scissors as we should want it to be. Stats are really, really strong, especially when Murlocs are out. And when Murlocs are in, Murlocs are just the dominant tribe at the moment because of their ability to get poison, and everyone else might be going for stats. So as long as you can grab poison, you can have relative confidence that you'll be able to beat them. And because stats are so powerful, and we've had power creep get those stats to such crazy numbers, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? We have much more dynamic gameplay than the original iteration of Battlegrounds, but with that we need to adapt the game iteratively to try and return or maintain some of that balance. And so right now I think stats are a little strong and access to poison is a little low, or the ability to deal with the stats. And then on top of that, because stats are so powerful, buffing some of the tribes that otherwise aren't really keeping pace. I didn't talk about cool boars really at all until the poison thing. Cool boars aren't in a great spot. Mechs are harder to play right now just because they don't have enough scaling to deal with the insane stats that elementals might be able to generate. Part of that is we removed a lot of the scaling, or tamed down some of it, right? So like Respot doesn't give as many stats, and so maybe reverting the stats on Respot can be enough to sort of bring that element back into the game and be a little bit stronger. Beasts, I think, are starting to get to a good spot with the removal of Maexxna, because it allows you to move Reanimating Rattler down to 4 and make that more powerful. But yeah, we definitely need a little bit more balance. We probably need a little bit more focus on some of the mid-game builds, just because you want the people that might not get super early direction to be able to compete with that, and then also to be able to potentially tech into stuff later so that they can use skill and their decisions in game knowledge and understanding to win games. What do you guys think? How do you think we should sort of address the state of the meta right now? I'd love to hear what you guys think. These are just some brief thoughts that I wanted to get down, in a quick little discussion video. And yeah, I'm curious what other people think about poison. Are you happy Maexxna was removed? Are you sad? Do you want other things added, like me, or not? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments below. If you don't already, be sure to like and subscribe. Turn on notifications to our channel. If you want more discussions like this, they happen all the time on our Twitch channel. So be sure to check out twitch.tv /Pocky Plays. Thanks for watching, and as always, peace.